Late at night, Sarah sat alone in the small, quiet house, staring at the crib where her baby lay asleep. The room felt cold and empty, and she could hear her own heartbeat thumping loudly. Her body was tired and weak after the birth, but even worse was the heaviness she felt inside. She loved her baby, but also felt scared, lost, and angry. She didn't understand why she felt this way, and she didn't know who to talk to. Her husband, Jim, was hardly ever home. When he did come back, he was often drunk, stumbling around the house, smelling like beer, and too tired to care about her or the baby. Every time Sarah looked at her tiny baby, a feeling of sadness and frustration filled her heart. She felt so alone, and the weight of caring for a baby all by herself made her wish, sometimes, that the baby had never been born. The days started blending together for Sarah. Morning would come, and she'd be up all night with the baby, listening to its tiny cries echoing through the empty house. The crying felt like it was eating away at her, making her more tired and empty. She didn't know how to make it stop or how to feel better. She tried holding the baby close, rocking it, but no matter what she did, a voice inside her kept whispering that maybe things would be easier if she didn't have the baby at all. When Jim finally came home late one night, Sarah hoped he would notice how she felt. But he didn't. He just walked past her with a bottle in his hand, slurring his words, and stumbled into bed without even looking at her. She watched him, feeling something breaking inside her. It felt like the walls around her heart were closing in, and there was no one to help her out. Her mind was full of dark thoughts, and she was starting to feel scared of herself, scared of what she was thinking, and scared of what she might do. The days crawled by one after another, and Sarah's sadness only seemed to grow deeper. Every morning, the sunlight would creep into her room, and she'd feel its warmth for a moment, but the darkness in her heart refused to fade. Her little baby would begin to cry, needing her attention, but Sarah found herself feeling too tired, too empty to move right away. She'd just lie there, staring at the ceiling, wishing she could close her eyes and wake up to a different life. She felt like she was drowning, and no one was there to save her. When she finally got up, she'd shuffle to the crib, picking up her baby with arms that felt like lead. She knew she was supposed to feel happy, supposed to feel full of love. But instead, all she felt was a deep, empty ache that no one else could see. The baby would stop crying in her arms, looking up at her with tiny, innocent eyes, and she'd feel guilt squeezing her heart. She knew the baby didn't deserve her sadness. It was just a tiny little thing, helpless and pure, but that didn't make the feelings go away. Jim continued to be distant, spending most of his time away from home. And when he was there, he was lost in his own world, drinking until he fell asleep. Sarah tried to talk to him once, hoping he'd notice her pain. She tried to tell him how lonely she felt, how hard it was for her to handle everything by herself. Jim, I need help. I can't do this alone, she whispered one night, her voice barely louder than a breath. But Jim only grunted, shrugging her off. Just toughen up, Sarah. Women have babies all the time, he mumbled, reaching for another bottle. Then he turned away, his eyes already half closed, and fell asleep on the couch. Sarah felt like her heart had been crushed into tiny pieces. She didn't have anyone else to turn to. Her family lived far away, and her friends had drifted apart after she got married. No one called to check on her, and no one asked how she was doing. She felt like she was invisible, like she didn't exist. She wanted to scream, to cry, but she didn't have the strength anymore. It was as if all the sadness inside her was too heavy to let out. One evening, as Sarah was feeding the baby, she started to feel angry. Not just at Jim or her life, but at herself, and even, though she hated to admit it, at the baby. The thought startled her, filling her with shame. She knew it wasn't fair. She knew it wasn't the baby's fault. But deep down, she felt like everything had changed when the baby arrived, and she didn't recognize her own life anymore. She had no freedom, no peace, no happiness. All she had was this endless cycle of feeding, changing, and crying. The baby cried a lot, too, as if sensing her sadness. Sarah tried her best to calm it down, to sing soft lullabies, but nothing seemed to work. The more the baby cried, the more frustrated and helpless she felt. One night, after hours of rocking and shushing, Sarah finally placed the baby back in the crib and stepped back, pressing her hands over her ears. The baby's cries were ringing in her head, each sound a reminder of how trapped she felt. "Why won't you stop?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Why can't you just let me rest?" But the baby didn't understand, of course. It just kept crying, needing her, calling out for her, and each cry felt like a weight pressing down on her heart. She backed away, feeling the darkness inside her swelling, filling her with thoughts she was too ashamed to admit. For the first time, she caught herself wishing that maybe things would be easier if the baby wasn't there. The thought horrified her, making her feel like a terrible person, but she couldn't push it away. It was there, lingering in the back of her mind, whispering that maybe, just maybe, she'd find peace again if she could somehow go back to the way things were before. One rainy evening after a long, exhausting day, Sarah sat by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. The baby was finally asleep, and the house was quiet, but her mind was anything but calm. She hugged herself tightly, trying to find some warmth, some comfort in the silence. She looked down at her hands, pale and trembling, and wondered who she had become. She felt like a stranger in her own skin, lost and broken. That's when she heard a tiny whimper from the crib. The baby was waking up again, its little cries breaking the stillness of the night. Sarah's heart sank. She wanted to cry, to scream, to make it all stop. She clenched her fists, feeling the anger and sadness boiling inside her, and for a brief, terrifying moment, she wished that the baby would just disappear. Immediately, guilt washed over her, crashing like a wave. She stumbled back, horrified at her own thoughts, covering her mouth as if to keep the darkness inside. She felt sick, ashamed of herself. She loved her baby. She knew she did. But this sadness, this emptiness was eating her alive, making her feel things she didn't want to feel. She sank to the floor, hugging her knees, and cried softly, afraid of her own mind. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's sadness only grew heavier. She started to feel numb, like she was drifting through her own life without really being there. She went through the motions of taking care of the baby, but her heart wasn't in it. She felt like a robot moving on autopilot, disconnected from everything around her. One day, while holding the baby in her arms, she noticed how fragile and tiny it was. Its little fingers wrapped around her thumb, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of love, a small, warm spark deep inside her. She wanted to hold on to that feeling, to let it fill her heart and push the darkness away. But the sadness was stronger, pulling her back into its cold embrace. Her days were spent in silence, her thoughts growing darker, her mind filled with regrets and fears. She began to wonder if things would ever get better, or if she'd be trapped in this sadness forever. She wished someone would come, anyone, to pull her out, to help her find herself again. But every time she looked around, she was alone. Alone with her thoughts, her fears, and the tiny baby who depended on her. And so each day she continued, surviving 1 hour at a time, hoping, somewhere deep down, that one day the darkness would fade, that one day she'd feel whole again. Jim's anger now seemed to grow with each passing day. The baby's cries echoed through the small house, filling every corner with a sound that grated against his nerves. At first, he would just mutter under his breath, cursing the noise. But as time went on, his frustration boiled over, and he began taking it out on Sarah. Every night it was the same. The baby would start to cry, tiny and helpless, and Sarah would do her best to soothe it, holding it close, rocking back and forth, shushing gently. But no matter what she did, the baby's cries didn't stop. They rose higher and higher, filling the house with a sound that felt like it would never end. Jim would stomp down the hallway, his face twisted with fury, fists clenched tightly at his sides. He'd stand in the doorway, watching Sarah with a look that made her heart pound with fear. "Can't you make it stop?" he'd yell, his voice sharp as a knife. "What kind of mother are you? You're useless, Sarah." Just shut that baby up. Sarah felt his words like a punch to her stomach, the shame and guilt washing over her. She tried even harder, bouncing the baby, singing lullabies, praying silently for the crying to stop. But nothing worked. The baby seemed to sense her fear, her sadness, and cried harder, as if lost in its own world of need. Every night, Jim's yelling would get louder, his patience shorter. He'd pace back and forth, swearing, sometimes throwing things just to release his anger. Plates shattered on the floor, glasses cracked against the walls, and Sarah flinched at every sound, holding her baby closer, trying to protect it from the storm raging around them. "Can't you do anything right?" he'd scream, his voice raw and filled with disgust. "What's the point of having you here if you can't even keep the house quiet?" Sarah felt herself shrinking, her heart breaking a little more each time. She knew she was failing, but she didn't know how to stop it. She didn't know how to make herself better, how to make the baby stop crying, or how to make Jim stop hating her. She felt trapped, like a bird in a cage, with no way to escape. One rainy evening, the storm outside seemed to mirror the storm brewing inside their home. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and rain poured down, tapping against the windows. The baby was crying again, its small voice rising above the sound of the rain, filling the house with its desperate wails. Jim's footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy and fast. Sarah tensed, holding her baby tighter, praying silently that he would leave them alone. But he burst into the room, his face red with anger, his eyes wild. "I've had enough of this," he yelled, his voice so loud it made Sarah jump. "I can't take it anymore. You're both driving me insane." "Jim, please," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm trying. I'm doing my best." "Your best?" he sneered, his lip curling. "Your best is worthless. All you do is sit there with that crying baby, ruining my life." He moved closer, his shadow looming over her, and for a moment, Sarah was terrified of what he might do. She tried to shield the baby, but her hands were shaking, her heart pounding in her chest. "Jim, please, the baby is just—" "Just what?" He cut her off, his voice dripping with venom. "A burden? A nuisance? That's exactly what it is. And I'm done with it. Both of you get out." Sarah's eyes widened, disbelief flooding through her. What do you mean, get out?" Jim pointed to the door, his face hard and unyielding. "I don't want you here anymore. You and that crying brat can find somewhere else to go." Sarah's heart dropped to the floor. She looked down at her baby, then back at Jim, hoping he'd show some sign of kindness, of understanding. But there was none. His face was a mask of rage, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "Jim, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Where will we go? It's pouring rain outside, and the baby—" "I don't care," he snapped, his tone final. "Just get out of my sight." Sarah's hands tightened around the baby, feeling the weight of the tiny body press against her. Her mind raced, searching for any other option, any way to stay. But she knew Jim meant every word. He was done with them. He had shut his heart, leaving no room for them in his life. With tears streaming down her face, Sarah got up slowly, clutching her baby to her chest. She felt her whole world crumbling around her, like pieces of glass shattering beyond repair. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, but she knew she couldn't stay. She couldn't put her baby in more danger. She walked down the hall, her footsteps echoing in the empty house. Jim didn't even look at her as she passed by. He simply turned his back, sinking into his chair with his drink in hand, as if she had never been there at all. Sarah opened the front door, stepping out into the rain. The cold drops hit her face, mixing with her tears, soaking through her thin clothes. She shivered, holding her baby tighter, shielding it from the rain as best she could. She had no umbrella, no coat, nothing to protect them from the storm. She walked down the street, her mind blank, her heart heavy. She felt like she was floating, lost in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She didn't know where to go, but she kept moving one step at a time, the rain pounding down on her, her shoes squelching in the mud. Her baby started to cry again, its tiny voice muffled by the rain. Sarah's arms ached from holding it so tightly, but she didn't let go. She kept walking, her legs growing weaker with each step, her body shivering from the cold. As she passed by darkened houses, she looked at the warm lights glowing inside, wondering if anyone would help her, if anyone would see her and take pity. But every window remained closed, every door shut tight against the storm. She was alone, just her and her baby, with no shelter, no safety. Finally, she reached a small park, the swings and benches glistening with rain. She sank onto a bench, her legs too tired to carry her any further. She pulled her baby close, wrapping her arms around it, trying to keep it warm. The baby's cries grew softer as if sensing her despair, and Sarah felt a fresh wave of tears spill down her cheeks. "Shuh," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "It's okay, we'll be okay somehow." But deep down, she wasn't sure if she believed her own words. The darkness inside her felt endless, a deep, aching sadness that wouldn't let go. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going, how much more she could take. As the rain continued to pour, Sarah sat on the bench, her heart breaking, her mind lost in a sea of hopelessness. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had to keep going. For her baby, for the tiny life that depended on her, she would find a way through the storm. But as she looked down at her baby's face, her own heart felt like it was drowning, swallowed by a sadness too deep to escape. As the rain kept pouring, Sarah sat there, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. She held her baby tightly, shivering as the cold seeped into her bones. She didn't know how long she sat there, but eventually a memory surfaced, a friend from years ago, someone who had once been close. Her name was Linda, and though they hadn't spoken much in recent times, Sarah remembered her as someone who had always been kind. In her desperation, she decided to give it a try. She didn't have anywhere else to go. Clutching her baby tightly, she made her way to Linda's apartment, each step feeling heavier than the last. The rain had finally slowed, but Sarah's clothes were soaked and her body felt drained, weak from the weight of all she had endured. By the time she reached Linda's doorstep, she was barely able to knock, her hand trembling as she raised it to the door. The door creaked open and Linda's face appeared, surprised to see her there, especially in such a state. "Sarah? What on earth? Come in, come in." Linda quickly ushered her inside, closing the door behind them. Sarah managed a weak smile as she stepped into the warmth of Linda's apartment. I didn't know where else to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Linda took one look at her friend's tear-streaked face and the little bundle in her arms. She led them to the sofa and fetched a blanket, wrapping it around Sarah. "What happened? Why are you out here in the rain with the baby?" Sarah looked down, struggling to find the words. Her emotions were tangled, raw, and painful. "Jim, he told us to leave. He couldn't take the baby's crying anymore." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, the shame creeping into her heart again. Linda's eyes softened with pity. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry." She looked at the baby, who was thankfully quiet for the moment, and nodded. "You can stay here for a while. Let's get you both settled." Relief washed over Sarah, but it was faint, like a weak candle barely flickering in the dark. She managed a grateful nod, letting Linda guide her to a small room at the end of the hallway. She set her baby down on the small bed, lying down beside it, finally feeling a tiny sliver of peace. For the first few hours, things felt calm. Linda brought her a cup of tea, sat with her, and offered some comforting words. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah felt like she could breathe. The quiet of the room, the warmth of the tea, and the soft hum of Linda's voice eased the tightness in her chest, if only for a moment. But that night, as the baby stirred and started crying, the familiar feeling of helplessness crept back in. Sarah's heart sank. She held the baby close, trying to rock it back to sleep, but the cries only grew louder, echoing off the walls of the tiny room. Linda came to the doorway, her face shadowed and tired. She hesitated, leaning against the doorframe. "Sarah, do you think you could, try to keep the baby quiet? I have to be up early for work. she said gently, though there was a hint of irritation in her voice. Sarah's heart twisted with guilt and shame. "I'm sorry, Linda. I'm trying, I really am," she said, her voice barely holding together. Linda sighed, trying to be understanding. "I know, it's hard. I don't get much sleep as it is, and with the baby, maybe if you could try feeding or walking him." Sarah nodded quickly, feeling the familiar desperation clawing at her. She walked back and forth, bouncing her baby in her arms, humming softly, hoping to quiet the cries. But nothing worked. The baby kept crying louder and louder, and Sarah felt herself sinking further into that dark place where sadness and guilt were all that existed. As the days went by, Linda's patience began to wear thin. The baby's cries seemed to stretch out into the night, keeping both Sarah and Linda awake. Sarah felt terrible, knowing she was causing trouble for her friend. She wanted to leave, to find somewhere else to go, but she had no one else. Each time Linda gave her a tired, strained look, Sarah's heart sank a little deeper. One evening, after another sleepless night, Linda approached Sarah with a forced smile, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Sarah, I've been thinking maybe it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay. It's just with work and everything, I can't keep going like this," she said, her words careful but firm. Sarah felt her heart break all over again. She understood. Linda had been kind enough to let her stay, but the baby's cries had become too much for her. Still, hearing those words felt like a door slamming shut, leaving her even more isolated, more alone. "I understand, Linda," Sarah whispered, barely able to look her friend in the eyes. "Thank you for everything. I'll find somewhere else." Linda looked relieved, but tried to hide it. "I wish things were different, Sarah. I really do. I hope you understand." Sarah managed a weak nod, forcing a small, sad smile. "I do. Don't worry. We'll be gone by tomorrow." That night, as Sarah lay beside her baby, the silence in the room felt unbearable. Her mind was racing, filled with dark thoughts and fears. She didn't know where she would go or what she would do. She had nowhere left to turn. She had lost her husband's support, and now even her closest friend couldn't bear to have her around. The baby stirred beside her, letting out a soft whimper. Sarah reached out, gently brushing a hand over its tiny head, feeling a mixture of love and despair. She wanted to be a good mother, to give this baby everything, but her sadness was so deep, so consuming, that it left her feeling empty and lost. Morning came all too quickly, and Sarah gathered her few belongings, wrapping her baby in a warm blanket. Linda hugged her at the door, though it felt distant, awkward, and wished her well. Sarah forced a smile, but inside, she felt like she was breaking into pieces. As she stepped out onto the street, the cold wind bit at her cheeks, and she clutched her baby tightly. She had no idea where to go, no place to call home. Her feet moved forward almost without thinking as she wandered through the town, her mind blank, her heart heavy. Hours passed, and Sarah found herself sitting on a bench in a nearby park, watching people walk by. No one looked at her. She was invisible, just another face in the crowd. The baby slept quietly in her arms, and for a brief moment, the peace of its sleep brought her a small measure of comfort. But that comfort was fragile, fleeting, like a thin layer of ice over deep, dark water. She knew that soon the baby would wake, and the cycle would begin again. She would be alone, with no one to turn to, no one to help her. The loneliness settled around her, thick and unyielding. She looked down at her baby, feeling a pang of love mixed with sorrow. She wanted to be the mother it needed, the one who would protect it from the world. But in her heart, the sadness remained, growing heavier by the day. And as the afternoon shadows stretched long, Sarah sat on that bench, feeling more lost than ever, unsure of what to do, where to go, or how to make it through another day. As the sun began to set, Sarah wandered aimlessly, her heart heavy with despair. She had nowhere left to go, no one left to turn to. The few belongings she had fit into a small bag slung over her shoulder, and she clutched her baby close, feeling the chill of the evening wind bite at her skin. The baby's weight in her arms felt unbearable, her body tired and weak from days of walking, worrying, and carrying this tiny life all alone. Each step she took felt like a step deeper into a darkness she couldn't escape. As she walked, she noticed a small house near the end of the street. It was an old, humble place with a garden in front and a little gate that looked worn but welcoming. She saw an elderly couple through the window, sitting together, their faces relaxed and peaceful. Without fully realizing it, she walked up to the old couple's gate. She stood there looking down at her baby, her mind racing with thoughts she was too ashamed to admit. She had tried her best, hadn't she? She had held on for as long as she could, but she was at the end of her strength. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't be the mother her baby needed. With a trembling hand, she reached out and gently placed the baby on the doorstep, carefully tucking the blanket around its tiny form. She took a step back, her heart pounding, her mind swirling with guilt and sorrow. She knew this was wrong, that leaving her baby was a terrible thing to do. But the darkness inside her felt too heavy, too overwhelming, and she didn't see any other way. Please stick to this channel for the next episode. Thank you for watching.